The Industrial Revolution was the transition to new manufacturing processes in the period from about 1760 to sometime between 1820 and 1840. This transition included going from hand production methods to machines. New chemical manufacturing and iron production processes improved efficiency of water power. The increasing use of steam power and the development of machine tools. It also included the change from wood and other biofuels to coal. Textiles were the dominant industry of the Industrial Revolution in terms of employment. Textiles were also the first to use modern production methods. The Industrial Revolution marks a major turning point in history. Almost every aspect of daily life was influenced in some way. In the words of Robert E. Lucas, Jr., for the first time in history, the living standards of the masses of ordinary people have begun to undergo sustained growth. The Industrial Revolution began in Great Britain and within a few decades spread to Western Europe and the United States. The period of time covered by the Industrial Revolution varies with different historians. Eric Hobsbawm held that it broke out in Britain in the 1780s and was not fully felt until the 1830s or 1840s, while T.S. Aston held that it occurred roughly between 1760 and 1830. The Industrial Revolution began an era of per capita economic growth in capitalist economies. Economic historians are in agreement that the onset of the Industrial Revolution is the most important event in the history of humanity. The first Industrial Revolution evolved into the Second Industrial Revolution in the transition years between 1840 and 1870, when technological and economic progress continued with the increasing adoption of steam-powered boats, ships, and railways, the large-scale manufactured machine tools, and the increasing use of machinery in steam-powered factories.
MTV Cribs, England, 1820. Come on, follow me. Son, come here. This is my son's room. You don't have any money because, we're trying to work our asses off, but, go to sleep. That's a pillow. Alright, we're trying to make some money now. Come here, follow me to this room. You see? This is my wife's workplace. It rains a lot here in England. So, I don't really care about her anyway, so follow me up here. Got some chairs. Alright, follow me to where the magic happens, right? The bedroom. Son, come here. Sit down. One day we're gonna have enough money to buy a better house because we're gonna join the Luddite movement because the machines are taking our jobs. But that's another story. So yeah, for right now, this is basically where my wife sleeps. That's a pillow, but it could also be turned into a chair. Yeah, this is England. Oh, Tsar Nicholas. Alright, so I was thinking about something, like, religion to control the population. What do you think about that?
Sounds good.
Son. Come on, son. We're going to church. Let's go.
I'm sorry, Father. I'm off to work.
What? You're going to have to go to church to serve the Lord. What you doing?
Why must I go to church? The Lord is not putting food on this table. This menial labor is.
The church must be more important.
Why? That's right.
Disgrace.
Political changes were very slow coming in 1750. Those that did come in 1832 and 1867 were seen as not changing a great deal, especially as neither gave women the right to vote. From 1750 to 1832, no political changes of any note took place. Britain was ruled in the following way. Only men with money and property rights could vote. The House of Lords could overrule any law passed by the House of Commons. Only men could be in the House of Commons and Lords, and no women, regardless of their wealth, could vote.
Son, we need to have a talk.
Father, are we liberals?
No! Liberals are the reason we live in this. Look at that. Liberals are the reason we live in filth because the machines are taking our jobs, son, alright? Alright? Don't be them. Conservatives?
Conservatives.
Proud of you, son. I've raised a good child.
With Britain's growing dependence on its working class to actually keep the Industrial Revolution going, without the workers, factories, and mines, etc., would have simply ground to a halt. Why was there no recognition of their importance in the political world? Those who controlled society wished for that situation to remain. During the 1790s, France had experienced a revolution in which many of the rich families that controlled France were executed by the guillotine. France then descended into a period of total chaos. That was exactly what those in Britain wanted to avoid. Although Britain had become a constitutional monarchy a century later, the descent and insubordination of the English working man reached its peak in the mid-19th century with Chartism, an ideology that called for political reform in the country. Its name was based on the People's Charter, a document written in 1838 by William Lovett and other radicals of the London Working Men's Association, and adopted at a national convention of working men's organizations in August of that year. Chartism rapidly gained support among the poorer classes and in northern England, where economic depression was common, and the people were upset about the new Poor Law Amendment. The public attention was largely thanks to Fergus O'Connor, a fervent radical with excellent oratory skills. However, the movement soon lost its momentum when its leader became divided over how its demands were to be enforced. A petition to Parliament was rejected in July of 1839, and most of the movement's leaders were arrested by the end of the year, after the November clash between Chartists and the military at Newport, Wales. There were many artistic movements during the period of Britain's industrialization, each of which was a reaction to the feelings of the time, as well as to the movement which had preceded it. By the time that the Industrial Revolution really took hold, some artists were at differences with the ideals which it espoused, such as those of discipline, temperance, structure, and views of the Enlightenment. These feelings translated into the Romantic movement, which encouraged individualism, freedom, and emotion. Neoclassicism, 1750 to 1820, the imitation or use primarily of the style. and aesthetic principles of ancient Greek and Roman classical art. Romanticism, 1800 to 1850, generally characterized by a highly imaginative and subjective approach, emotionally intensity, and a dreamlike or visionary quality. Realism, 1845 to 1900, an attempt to represent figures and objects exactly as they appear in life. Impressionism and Post-Impressionism, late 19th century. Instead of painting an ideal of beauty, the Impressionists tried to depict what they saw at a given moment, capturing a fresh, original vision. They often painted out of doors so that they could observe nature more directly and set down its most fleeting aspects, especially the changing light of the sun. Impact on America. The transition from an agricultural to an industrial economy took more than a century in the United States, but that long development entered its first phase from the 1790s through the 1830s. The Industrial Revolution had begun in Britain during the mid-18th century, but the American colonies lagged far behind the mother country, in part because the abundance of land and scarcity of labor in the New World reduced interest in expensive investments in machine production. Nevertheless, with the shift from handmade to machine-made products, a new era of human experience begun, where increased productivity created a much higher standard of living than had ever been known in the pre-industrial world. The start of the American Industrial Revolution is often attributed to Samuel Slater, who opened the first industrial mill in the United States in 1790, with a design that borrowed heavily from a British model. Slater's pirated technology greatly increased the speed with which cotton thread could be spun into yarn. When he introduced a vital new technology to the United States, the economic takeoff of the Industrial Revolution required several other elements before it would transform American life. Another key to the rapidly changing economy of the early Industrial Revolution were new organizational strategies to increase productivity. This had begun with the outwork system, whereby small parts of a larger production process were carried out in numerous individual homes. This organizational reform was especially important for shoe and boot making. However, the chief organizational breakthrough of the Industrial Revolution was the factory system, where work was performed on a large scale in a single centralized location. Among the early innovators of this approach were a group of businessmen known as the Boston Associates, who recruited thousands of New England farm girls to operate the machines in their new factories. The most famous of their tightly controlled mill towns was Lowell, Massachusetts, which opened in 1823. The use of female factory workers brought advantages to both employer and employee. The Boston Associates preferred female labor because they paid the young girls less than men. These female workers, often called Lowell girls, benefited by experiencing a new kind of independence outside the traditional male-dominated family farm. The rise of wage labor at the heart of the Industrial Revolution also exploited working people in new ways. The first strike among textile workers protesting wage and factory conditions occurred in 1824, and even the model mills of Lowell faced large strikes in the 1830s. Until the publication of the Sadler Report in 1833, the poor social conditions in Britain went largely ignored by the ruling classes. It was commissioned in 1832, and the Sadler Committee undertook a great investigation into the various aspects of life for the working classes, hearing testimony from members of the working class. The Sadler Report eventually found evidence of human rights abuse and terrible working conditions, suggesting that reform had to be implemented to avoid general social unrest. Before the report, governments were averse to the implementation of reforms based on their strict policy of laissez-faire, a large part of the liberalism that the government found sacred. After its publication, however, the British government was forced to act. Following is a list of the various reforms implemented due to the social and working conditions in Britain. Fundamental shifts in social structure. During the Industrial Revolution, the social structure of society changed dramatically. Before the revolution, most people lived in small villages, working either in agriculture or as skilled craftsmen. They lived and often worked as a family, doing everything by hand. In fact, 3/4 of Britain's population lived in the countryside, and farming was the predominant occupation. With the advent of industrialization, however, everything changed. The new enclosure laws, which required that all grazing grounds be fenced in at the owner's expense, had left many poor farmers bankrupt and unemployed, and machines capable of huge outputs made small hand weavers redundant. As a result, there were many people who were forced to work at the new factories. This required them to move to towns and cities so that they could be close to their new jobs. It also meant that they made less money for working longer hours. Add to this the higher living expenses due to urbanization, and no one could easily see that many families' resources would be extremely stretched. As a result, women and children were sent out to work, making up 75% of early workers. Families were forced to do this since they desperately needed money, while factory owners were happy to employ women and children for a number of reasons. First of all, they could be paid very little, and children could be controlled more easily than adults, generally through violent beatings. Children also had smaller hands, which were often needed to reach in among the parts of a machine. Furthermore, employers found that children were more malleable and adapted to the new methods much better than adults did. Children were also sent to work in mines, being small enough to get more coal and ore from the deep and very often unsafe pits. They could also be forced to work as long as 18 hours each day. For these reasons, children as young as 8 years old were sent to factories, usually those which manufactured textiles, where they became part of a growing and profitable business. This unprecedented growth and profit was another social change that occurred during the Industrial Revolution. The laissez-faire approach taken by the government and advocated by economist Adam Smith allowed capitalism to flourish. There were little to no government regulations imposed upon factory policies, and this allowed the wealthy, middle-class owners to pursue whichever path was more profitable, regardless of the safety and well-being of their workers. This relentless pursuit of money caused another important social change, the ultimate breakdown of the family unit.
Whoa. Victor! What are you doing?
I'm working for the king.
Why? Who told you to do such a menial task?
The church told me to. God told me to, so, because the king said it, so I guess God wants me to do it, right?
Since workers, especially women and children, were laboring for up to 18 hours each day, there was very little family contact, and the only time that one was at home was spent sleeping. People also had to share housing with other families, which further contributed to the breakdown of the family unit. As a result, children received very little education, had stunted growth, and were sickly. They also grew up quite maladjusted, having never been taught how to behave properly. The living conditions were indeed horrible. Working families often lived in slums with little sanitation, and infant mortality skyrocketed. During the early Industrial Revolution, 50% of infants died before the age of 2. However, the social changes that took place were not all negative. Most classes eventually benefited in some way from the huge profits that were being made, and by 1820, most workers were making somewhat better wages. The widespread poverty and constant threat of mass starvation lessened, and overall health and material conditions of the populace clearly improved. The government, however, did have to eventually intervene in order to put an end to child labor and other unacceptable practices.
Yo, Czar Nicholas, what's up?
Bah!
Wait, what was that thing you talking to me about? I forgot.
I forgot as well. Really, what was I supposed to say?
Oh, Czar Nicholas.
Bah!
All right. So I was thinking about something like religion to control the population. What do you think about that?
Sounds good.
So we
What
should.
the fuck? It's like, I need to tell you how to be a man.
All right, go ahead, do it. Son, we need to have a talk. you got to say like something about liberals. Like, are we liberal?